Hello and welcome to the Better Ways podcast. I'm Tom.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome, Jamie. How are you doing?
Good, thank you, Tom. Been a while since our last
Yeah,
one,
it's
I
been
think.
quite a while. Yes, life,
Yeah.
eh?
Should we blame summer holidays and all those things that
Yes,
we
we
do?
can.
Yeah.
Although I haven't got on mine yet, but yeah,
I have you not.
no,
When are you off?
soonish. Yes,
Soonish.
but
Okay,
it'll be something I'm looking forward to.
that's good.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so nothing been happening though. Nothing in the news. No controversy. Nobody
There
getting
hasn't
upset
really. The
about
world hasn't.
anything at all, right?
The world hasn't ended yet. It's as always. It's in the middle of the real world equivalent of a Royal Rumble from wrestling. Do you remember the back when we were kids?
Yes, Royal. It's a knockout.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think things are carrying on. There's conflict, there's divisiveness. It's
Hmm.
all the usual things we've come to expect in
Hmm.
the
Cool.
2020s decade.
So
Yeah.
what's caught your eye lately?
So there was an interesting one.
Hmm.
It's not that interesting. 'Cause it doesn't affect you or I that much because we're not avid viewers, but probably a good one to talk about in terms of the wider media landscape. The GB News kerfuffle that's been going
Ah,
on for the
yes,
last
yes.
10 days. I think 10 days?
GB,
Week?
GBBs, as some call it.
TVs, as some antagonists like to call it, yeah.
Yes.
Or was it Britain's only true honest network, as some other people
Ah,
like
okay.
to call it.
Yeah,
Yeah, depending which
yeah.
side of the political line you
Oh, well, I
stand
think
on.
there's a Talk TV competitor
Talk
as well,
TV,
isn't there? Um, so
Talk
we should
TV.
explain for those that don't know. These are two new TV channels in the UK, but they're also, I mean, most of their viewership is online. So
Hmm,
they are TV channels. They show TV news
yeah,
and current affairs, have interviews, opinion pieces. Um, but the vast majority of the viewership is online. Um,
yes, correct.
and they are challenging existing channels. And these two come from a kind, I would say, centre right
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
ethos. And that in itself is enough for quite a few people to want to shut them down.
More than a few. Yeah, yeah.
Believing they're the spawn of Satan. And I've watched
We'll
bits
put it
on
that
both
way.
of them, I think. And so, it's the usual thing. Some stuff is good and some stuff is
Yeah,
not. And some stuff's
exactly.
downright
Yeah,
awful. But
yeah.
I could say that of anything I've seen on BBC or Channel 4 or other channels as well.
Absolutely right. Yeah. It depends on your view of the world, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
what you think is honest or dishonest. You know,
Mm.
hilariously, Talk TV is the other one, isn't it? That's
Yes.
been
Yeah.
around.
Piers Morgan
That,
and co. Yeah.
yeah, that's been around for a while with their news channel. You had
Yes.
Talk Radio
Yes.
with, Julia Hardy Brewer and the others,
Oh,
and
yes.
they've been massively popular for years now. So for them
Yeah.
making the switch to, to having a TV station did
Mm.
make sense. GB News was the real, bootlace startup, wasn't it?
Yes.
By
Yes.
bootlace, I mean they put it together using bootlaces rather than pulling themselves
Yeah.
up by their
Yeah.
bootlaces. And I think GB News has gone more down the shock jock line of trying to
Yeah.
attract viewership, whereas Talk TV badges itself
Mm.
as being a bit more professional,
Oh,
but it's only
I don't know. I
professional
mean,
if you're
if
right
you
wing.
hire Piers Morgan, I mean, isn't he the ultimate shock jock?
Yeah, true. He's the ultimate shock jock now, isn't he? Yeah, he is the
Yeah.
ultimate shock jock.
I guess trying to get a sense of what they're like. So LBC is a Londoner's idea of a right wing station.
Is it really? I thought they're very quite left wing.
They are very left wing,
I say because like Ian Dale
but
was
they
quite
do
right
have a
wing.
few right wing voices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Ian Dale and
Uh,
who's the other guy? The big chunky
Ferrari.
fella,
Ferrari, yeah. Nick
Nick
Ferrari.
Ferrari. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
He's quite right wing
So
as
we're
well.
not talking that. We're not talking that. If you're used to LBC, you'll be shocked if you watch these other
Yeah.
channels. So be
Yes,
careful.
correct.
It's
Yes,
a health warning.
it is a health warning. It will rot your brain,
We
apparently.
don't believe in censorship, but we are quite happy to give a health warning.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
So
do you
shall
want
I?
to set up what happened then with this
Yeah. So
latest controversy?
I'm not an expert on it because, to be honest, I got bored after a while. But
Hmm.
basically, it was a response video to a
Mm-hmm.
BBC. I think it was a BBC segment where the comedian Jeff Norcott was on with two or three other people,
Yeah.
and one of them was the lady. I think her name's Ava Santini. Ava Sant. If you should know.
Yes, that's her handle.
Yeah.
Ava
Yes.
Santina, I think.
Yes. I know her first name is Ava. I don't know her surname, but
It might be Ava
very left wing.
Evans, I think, maybe. But
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. Very left wing. Very left wing. And I would say, in my opinion, comes across as what you'd expect a typical quiet, hard left,
Hmm.
presenter or political commentator to come across as.
Hmm.
So not much nuance to the views.
Yeah.
Not much beyond a surface knowledge of their subject. Just like a lot of right wing
Hmm.
commentators, it's just this is what I believe and bugger all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, they were talking about a minister for men,
Yes.
okay, and there
To
was
be an
some
equivalent
kickback
for the Minister for Women.
for women,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and there was some kickback for I think some of the women on the segment
Mm.
because of patriarchy and insert reason here. And Jeff Northcock, well, quite rightly, brought up the fact that male suicide is obviously significantly higher than it is for women, and
Mm.
that men do perhaps face very unique challenges in comparison to women, just as women have unique challenges in
Yeah.
comparison to men. And her response to it depends on your ideology, and it depends what you're trying to get from it. I
Mm.
thought she actually answered it quite well, which
Hmm.
is mental health is a thing that affects everybody, so there should be a minister for
Yes.
mental health.
Yeah.
Some people who don't like her basically said she was sneering at the idea of male suicide. That's a very uncharitable interpretation of what happened, I think.
Yeah. I
But
think,
that
as
was a
I
vibe.
remember watching it, she didn't like the idea of a Minister for Men. And I think she was saying, what about children? What
Mm,
about mental health in general?
exactly.
Um, uh, but I think there was also something in there around an objection to having a minister for men like there's a minister for women.
Mm,
So I do think she was objecting to that. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
So anyway, the interpretation, of course, was that she was sneering at men's
Mm.
suicide, and so GB News, I think, grabbed hold of this. Lawrence Fox and Dan Whitten were talking, and I think he either said or tweeted. I think he said something, didn't he, along the lines of, was it something like, "I wouldn't even shag her" or something like
Well,
that?
what happened was I saw the clip. So Dan Wootton, who has we'll say what's happened in a minute. So he
Mhm.
was watching. He'd been watching that clip with Dan Wootton,
Mm.
and then reacted to it, and he was saying that this thinking. I think what made him cross was he felt that the needs of men were being minimised
Mm.
in this conversation, not just by Ava Santina, but others too, um, and that it was being laughed. It was almost being laughed at, so that made him
Yeah.
cross. And then he said that he's got history with her on Twitter and other things, and previous debates. And then he said something to the effect of that he wouldn't.
Mm.
Somebody like that wouldn't be attractive, and not somebody he would go to bed with.
Yeah.
At which point Dan laughed nervously, not expecting it.
Mm.
And then they kind of wrapped up the segment pretty quick.
Mm.
So, on the face of that, and I guess it's weird because we're reacting to them reacting to watching something
Yeah.
else. The On the face of it, it didn't particularly seem a big deal to me. What was said,
No.
I wouldn't have said it,
Same.
but I don't think it came across the way he wanted. But
It it was
I mean, I've
childish,
heard a lot of worse
nasty.
things of people
Yeah.
calling. It wasn't like an incitement to violence or death or
No.
to kill
It
her or
was
harm her or anything like that, which I've heard
the
from
reason
other
why.
people.
Well, yeah, absolutely. The reason why I'm
Yeah.
kind of smiling is because it's like it was so childish and nasty.
Yes.
It's, do you know, it like men's health and men's suicide is such a massive issue,
Mm.
and
Mm.
it got buried under this
Yeah.
storm that
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
off the
Yeah. Yeah.
back of it. And I'm
Well,
thinking,
so
just
that's
you
what's
don't,
happened. So let's just bring people up to
yeah,
date. What happened? So Lawrence Fox was immediately suspended, as was Dan Wootton for not challenging him on it or something.
mm,
Um, and it was a huge storm of protests, and then there were lots of calls on other channels for the GB News to be shut down. Um, uh, and then a few things emerged, like Ava Santina had used the same kind of language repeatedly on her
Yeah.
Twitter feed, which was also public.
Yeah.
So it could have been that Lawrence was responding in kind, although he's doing it on TV. But I don't see that as a huge distinction. Twitter's completely public internationally, so is TV. So is it worse to say something on TV than Twitter? I don't see why. It's still, if it's being said by the same person. So anyway, suddenly there's a huge storm saying that this is like, but as you say, what's important about this is we're not talking about men's mental health.
Exactly.
We're not talking about suicides and what we do about them. And instead we're talking about Lawrence Fox and Dan Wootton and GB News.
Yeah. It's a culture war smokescreen for what is a very, very serious issue.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It
Which
really
is always
is
the way.
frustrating.
You always the whole Philip Schofield thing. What we should have been talking was safeguarding young people in the workplace.
Yeah.
But we didn't talk about that. We talked a lot about Philip and Holly Willoughby and other people. And again, with Hugh Edwards, we're not talking about mental health, which is what that story actually is about, in my opinion. We were talking about who did he pay, and or we're talking about newspapers and not researching the story before they break it and then having to apologise. All of which matters, but it's not as important as the main story. So there's a pattern here where the actual issue gets buried. And Lawrence has done an apology video, and it's partly apologetic.
Not really, though, has he?
Partly defiant. Yeah.
He did. He said, "I'm sorry," was he? Something along the lines of, "I'm sorry because I came across in the way that I didn't want to come across." But almost like, "I'm not sorry for kind of having a pop at you."
Well, he said plenty of things before that were very combative.
I think he's got no fear now.
And so he's back on the free speech thing and all that. And he using himself now as an example of censorship. But all of this is a distraction from the actual issue. The issue, which we should be looking at, is there's horrifying statistics on the number of men, particularly young men, committing suicide. And as was made out in the piece with Jeff Norcott, as he pointed out, as one of the ladies pointed out, it might have been Ava Santina. A lot of women attempt suicide as well, but they're not as successful. They tend not to succeed in doing it. So there are many attempts for women, but there are not many successful suicides by women. Which I think was what Jeff was trying to get across, that that's one reason why we should look at this, particularly for men, because there are a lot of successful. They tend to succeed when they try. So it's kind of like you say, it's a depressingly common thing where the important issue gets lost in all the drama.
The other thing to consider with this, and again, I think you and I both wanted to touch on, was the response from other media outlets, and I think that is really important because you had, I think it was Adam Bolton at Sky News, basically calling for them to be shut down, and he said the reason he gave, again, a paraphrase, was something like they're a disturbance or something to the media ecosystem.
Yes, I heard that.
The goal behind that statement.
Well, I guess, let's be charitable. I guess what he's saying is we got a stable system with the existing channels, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky, where they behave themselves, and questions go to those people at the press, and there's a little club there. There's a little club of politicians, and they all very happily report and interact and make press statements and ask questions. But it did sound a bit Orwellian, as if it's well, hang on, you can't have a different voice. Exactly. And it's completely out of proportion, these calls for shutting things down. I mean, even if you hate it, and I think there are a lot of people who do hate the output on GB News and Talk TV, you're much better off having that on air, where it can be challenged and ridiculed and fact checked, than having it on some dark internet server
or even a mainstream internet server. I mean, if you look at
Yeah.
Russell Brand's a really good example of this.
Yes.
So if
Yes.
you look
That's
at the
another one.
sway that he has on YouTube and on Rumble as well,
Yeah.
which by the way, he should have a platform for that.
Yeah.
He should in the sense that just like everybody else, if he obeys the rules of the platform,
Mm.
then you can put stuff on the platform, no matter
Yeah.
how much I may disagree with what Russell
Mm.
Brand says or his interpretation of things.
Mm.
Um, you know, but you're right. So Russell, let's use him as an example. Russell has, I don't know, 3 million
6, I think.
followers on YouTube or something like that.
I think it's six
He
million.
has far
Yeah.
more of a reach
Yeah.
through his videos than GB News
Mm.
does. So if Lauren Fox left GB News, which I
Yeah.
think he will set up, if he hasn't already got one, his
Mm.
own YouTube and Rumble platform. He will
Yeah.
call it Free Speech Fox or something like that.
Mm.
And then he will have his 1.2 or however many people that he will draw into his ecosystem where he can go on these ramblings and these rants. And as long as he doesn't use calls for violence,
Yeah.
racism, all the rest of it, then he'll be able to get a message which is as or more damaging over to 1.3
Mm.
million people unchallenged because there will be no one on there to challenge
Mm.
him for it. So you're right. It is in everybody's interest. We should really have a wider umbrella of channels under
Mm.
Ofcom's regulations
Well,
than
yeah, yeah.
off
Although in the news
Ofcom.
today, Canada are trying to regulate
Oh,
podcasts. So
yeah,
that's, although it's
they're
not
an
as bad.
Orwellian nightmare, aren't they,
Again,
mate?
people have flown off the handle about it. It's only actually ones that get 10 million Canadian dollars a year or more. So
Yeah,
it's not most people, but
yeah,
it
I
would
don't
involve
know.
the big podcasts. Um,
Canada's gone very bizarre over the
mm.
last few years. They've gone really bizarre,
But
really
I mean
bizarre.
that could be seen as a step to start to regulate beyond the traditional media.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
not entirely convinced how comfortable I am about that because once you
yeah.
control the information, yeah. I think you and I have said this before, and I can't remember who it was. I
Mm.
stole it from somewhere. A great saying, and I throw this back at people
Mm.
now all the time. Was if you believe your system is just, put your enemies in charge of it and have them run it on you. Okay,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
really like that because it allows you to go. Hang on a minute. It's a smart way of going. Oh, I'm sure that your integrities and your morals are so
Yeah.
so on
Yeah.
point that if somebody you really liked got hit by it, you wouldn't have a problem with it, would you? They're like, oh, well,
I mean,
yeah,
I think that I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with Ofcom rules applying to podcasts,
I agree.
but they're designed. They're probably not suitable for all cases because they're designed for broadcast news.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I mean, if you were trying to do a podcast that was purporting to be newsworthy, it would require you to have balance. And you could still do opinion pieces as long as they're clearly labelled.
mm,
So I think there is a need for this. I mean, this sort of feeds back in to the whole question of platforms or publishers. So a
mm.
lot of these platforms want it both ways. So
Yeah,
the likes of the big platforms, like Meta and YouTube, X, and all that. So the basic provision is that we're a platform, so we shouldn't be regulated. And
mm,
I think you're a platform. Well, then, if you're a platform, you shouldn't be regulated. You should be required to allow everybody to speak, unless they're
mm-hmm,
breaking the law.
mm-hmm,
A platform should be open. You then shouldn't be able to enforce your own arbitrary rules about what can and can't be shown, what can and can't be monetized, and all of that. There should
mm.
be regulations around that so that people can earn a living even if they have opinions you don't like. And the
Yeah,
other choice could be, well, no, we're going to be a publisher. But if you're a publisher, then I think you would be able to choose what you have, like any publisher. But you'd also assume liability. So
yeah,
you would be, just like a newspaper, you'd be liable for anything that was published on your platform. And then I
absolutely.
would
You
ask,
couldn't.
then I would ask the two, not the two, but all the platforms to choose. Do you want to be a publisher or a platform?
Mm,
You can have all the rules you want. You can limit it down. You can represent a particular point of view. But if you want to be a platform, then you've got to have a commitment to freedom of speech, a lack of bias, and a light touch in terms of what you
yeah.
censor.
I agree. Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
that's where I would go. And I think what's happening is Musk is trying to make X into that kind of platform,
Yeah, yeah,
and so are things. Rumble is an attempt to do that too. And I think some of the existing systems like YouTube are getting more and more like publishers, where there are all sorts of people complaining about being demonetized and blocked and copyright challenged and left, right, and centre, or not just on these topics, but on all sorts of things.
yeah,
So it becomes you're going to have an ever increasing army of people trying to police what's on your system.
yeah,
So that's one of the things we do need. So better regulation to get to grips with all this stuff. So that if you have someone like Russell Brand, then you've got some help to find out if what he's saying is true.
yeah. Twitter tries to do that, or X tries to do that with community notes, doesn't it?
Yep,
Where
yep,
the
that's a nice
community
system.
will. I think it's a decent system. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is a decent system, and it's backfired against. Well, not backfired against him because he probably knew he'd take the hits with it as well.
he's being
Where he
community
gets
noted.
community
Yeah,
noted,
yeah, yeah,
it's quite amusing. Yeah, it
yeah,
is quite. It's a difficult one. We've never threaded the needle,
yeah,
of free speech versus regulation because I don't think it is
yeah.
possible. There is no arbiter of truth, is there? Nobody is
Well,
completely
I,
100%
I
accurate.
don't think we've tried. I mean, when was the last time somebody put forward something sensible? I mean,
I don't
I
think it
think
came
there's a
for
lack
years.
of I think there's a lack of creativity and innovation here.
Mm,
Yeah, and at the moment, I mean, at X, everyone's freaking out. Not everybody, but a lot of people on the left are freaking out about X because obviously now it's not left facing and censoring the right. There's a lot more different voices on it, and there's a lot of fuss about Russian disinformation. But of course, you're going to
yeah,
get that if you open up, if you have a platform which is open and allows people to express all perspectives. You'd expect that's where the Russian disinformation would be.
hundred
I think the
percent.
question is not to remove it, but to be able to detect it and mark it
Yeah, and
and fact
flag
check
it.
it,
Also.
flag it,
Yeah,
and fact check it.
yeah,
And again, I think that's much healthier than calling for it to be, I mean, effectively, they're calling for X to be regulated, and I think Biden's come out and said Twitter is full of disinformation. It's kind of funny given how much the US government was controlling what was on Twitter
yeah.
before
But
Musk
also,
took
it's
over.
never disinformation when it works in your side's favour.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So
the
I
bit
think
that gets my
sunlight's the
goat.
best. Yeah, exactly. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. So let's
It
hide
is.
out there.
I agree with that.
Um,
I agree. But then
but
there is an element of
we'll.
crazy that you can't negotiate with.
Yeah, I think anything that's. Although I think the boundaries, anything illegal, anything a call to violence, or
Hmm.
directly put people in harm, you don't want. Um, but
That's a tricky one, though. That last one.
I'm not saying there aren't blurry edges.
It's
Um,
very difficult.
but at the moment, people are freaking out because Musk is talking his mind on Russia and Ukraine. Um,
Mm,
but they forget that he's just a guy talking his mind.
yeah, yeah,
And he's not an
yeah,
expert on the topic, although
yeah.
he may know more about it than a lot of people do.
Although, if you think about it, Tom, what did he spend on Twitter? It was a stupidly overpaid amount of money.
46 billion, I think.
46 million, Jesus. That
Yeah.
is an obscene. When you think about it, it's not worth like even half that now.
No,
But
but it was overpriced. But
it was overpriced. But I guess just thinking about it, like people mocking him, going, okay, he's losing
mm,
X amount of money all the time. Let's face it, he's
yeah,
massively reduced the cost. I think he's got like 10% of the workforce running on
yeah,
it now.
something like
So,
that,
and I
10 or
think he'll
15%.
find a way of making it cost neutral. But
Yeah,
just think about this: if all it took was $46 billion, I'm assuming all it
yeah,
took was $46 billion for you to be able to, at a click of a button,
mm,
get rid of
mm,
everyone that you didn't like because he has the power to do that. Let's just say he's pushed the button,
yeah,
got rid of everyone didn't like, and
yeah,
then just use Twitter as a tool to
mm,
start riots. Just as an example, I'm going to put,
yeah,
just
yeah,
thinking it through.
yeah,
He could go, gather tomorrow if you want to defend democracy. That would go out to the
mm,
300 million people that are on Twitter. How many
yeah.
tens or hundreds of thousands of people will turn up in a town or a city to because they feel that there's some threat that Musk has told them about? That 46 billion seems quite cheap to have the power
Well,
to move people.
yes, he was on it before,
It
but
was.
obviously he's got more control of it and a bigger
Mm,
following now. Yeah, and this is the other thing that's in the news. Should someone like him have all this power?
mm,
Usually said by people who have lots of money and power in
yeah,
political positions.
yeah. Who were happy with it before when it was censoring
Presidents
right-wing
and
people
prime
and so on.
ministers and others,
Yeah,
who don't ask it of
yeah,
themselves. Now, you could say they've got a
yeah.
democratic remit, and most of them do. But you could also say, well, Musk is only there because people bought his products, and that is a form of not. It's not explicit voting on what he does, but
Mm,
if people are free to boycott Tesla, boycott SpaceX,
mm,
Starlink, I suppose is what you can boycott there, and any of his other ventures, if they didn't like what he's doing, um,
mm.
there's no requirement to be on X, and uh, so uh, you could say, well, should he have all of this power? The problem I have with that is the kind of people who would take it away from him are the politicians who would take 46 billion, spend it, and have no impact.
Mm, mm.
Who
Yeah,
would fritter it away and waste
yeah,
it, or send it to their friends, or cronies. So I'm not convinced that we would, that I'm sure there'd be lots of well-meaning people who would want to spend it on various causes, but it wouldn't necessarily give a good result.
yeah.
And that's only part of his fortune. But yeah, so this question about should billionaires exist? Should they be allowed to have this power? I think it's an interesting one. I mean, their power is completely limited by whether or not people engage in their products and services,
Yeah.
and that is a break on their behaviour. I mean, Musk can't say and do anything he likes because he's got factories around the world. He's got different countries to balance.
Or shareholders.
It's different
Yeah,
regulators. He's got shareholders. He's heavily in debt.
yeah.
So it's not quite as it seems. I think he's just what particularly throws people with him. It's a bit like Trump. He's completely unfiltered and will just speak his mind
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
publicly.
That's exactly it.
And you're not supposed to do that if you're a responsible
Yeah.
CEO or billionaire. And
Yeah.
I actually love that because it's like it's human. It's like, and I wish, wouldn't it be great if all presidents and prime ministers were just tweeting
It's
their
really
opinions
honest. Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day.
rather than
I've
this
never going
false facade and fake,
Yeah,
telling people
exactly.
what you think they should hear or want to hear.
Yeah, I agree. Because when I hear a politician, no matter which party they're for, I'm just like, you're so fake. It's
Mm,
unbelievable. Like,
yeah,
you are literally draped in this thin cloth, and we're supposed to believe the cloth is you. And it's like,
yeah.
I don't see it. And I was thinking,
And the fundamental there is this belief that that normal people are stupid, and you have to tell
yeah,
them,
yeah,
you have to talk down to them, you have to be condescending. They're not educated. If they were educated better, they'd believe the same things you did. I mean, it
yeah,
is really one
absolutely.
of the large belief of the ruling class across the world. Um, and I don't think they give credit for the ability of very ordinary people to understand and make decisions. Whereas someone like Musk doesn't indulge in that. He just says, you know, what he thinks. He's quite good
Mm,
at explaining complicated things simply, and
mm,
puts it out there. And I think Trump does that as well, in the sense that whilst he'll boast and exaggerate and lie all the time, um, it's completely obvious that that's what's happening.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas when a normal politician is telling you something, you just know that they're not telling you what they really think. That it's not
yeah,
obvious. It's a lie masquerading as the truth. And they're
yeah,
doing it because they think that this is the right thing to do, or that
yeah.
and they can't tell you what they really think they'd love to. But then and all this stuff gets in the way, and I think that's why people are so cynical about politicians.
Yeah, I agree. They don't think you don't feel like you're being spoken to honestly in the
Mm.
slightest. And I think that's because there is a big degree that if we were spoken to honestly, we'd be spending most of our lives in some form of constant terror. Be that about the
Maybe,
climate, the economy, the NHS, education,
maybe,
policing.
maybe.
You'd be like that going, yeah. I think it's because people don't understand how complicated things are. And
Mm.
this is something that I've been trying to take now with more ideological people when I
Yeah.
get into a discussion with them online or face to face. Again, let's talk about the one that you and I always bring up, which is
Mm.
like housing, for example. And I think you
Mm.
and I spoke about this briefly before. There was a
Yeah.
young guy on Twitter who put a picture of a lovely four-bed semi, complete with faux marble arches and all this lot,
Mm.
and he said this should be worth £60,000 it's a government choice not to. And I was like, and I didn't have to answer him because all the tradespeople came back and answered him and went, "You're a moron. That's worth probably about 200 grand in labour and materials alone, before the land, before anything else." Okay,
Yeah.
so when I get into discussions with people now who come up with really
Mm,
simple stands on things like, we should just build more houses, or we can take in, 600,000 net migration as an example,
mm,
because we just build more houses and infrastructure. And I'm like,
mm,
you do understand the average construction project is 2 years, two
mm.
years from start to finish, whether it's a shop
Yeah.
or a school, roughly what it
But
takes.
that
Look at
points,
HS2.
yeah, that points to the important question, which is how do we make it cheaper? How do we make it faster? How do we simplify home construction? Can we print houses? Why are infrastructure projects like HS2 costing 100 billion in this country
That's
and
a
not
good question.
in other countries? Like the French, I think, completed a new line for about 7 billion recently.
Yeah, that is the
Um,
question, isn't it?
and that's the question nobody's actually asking. They're just
No one.
either saying we've got to carry on or
Yeah,
telling us we're hopeless and we've got to give up. Whereas we should be actually understanding why it costs so much and doing something about it.
100% agree. Aaron Bastani of Novara Media made a really good
Hmm.
point earlier. I think it was kind of spun off from wider discussions about HS2 and other bits. He's just come back from France and Spain, I think. I'm probably getting the
Hmm.
countries wrong, but the point remains. He said he went to run of the mill Spanish or French towns and villages, and he
Hmm.
goes, per capita, like per capita per head,
Hmm.
we are on paper wealthier than your average French or Spanish person. Because
Hmm.
when you go to their towns or villages, you see
Hmm.
thriving
Hmm.
towns or villages. They have shops, they have restaurants,
Yeah.
they don't have rundown buildings that are half empty
Hmm.
all the time. And he goes, it doesn't make sense why in the
Hmm.
UK our headline figures are so
Hmm.
good, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty street level, and you look at things, you're like, something
Yeah.
isn't working here. It's the same with
Well, we're
HS2.
very
You're right.
centralised compared to a lot of them.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, yeah, anyway, we could go on forever about that.
you could go on forever.
But yes, the principle here is people try and oversimplify and talk down and condescend, and
Mm,
not level with the public about the issue.
yeah,
Um,
agreed.
and that's why people respond so well to anybody, whether it be Joe Rogan or some, similar, who just ask simple questions and openly level with what they know.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, so that's the change we need.
I agree. We put the words right once more, Tom.
We have.
Good
Okay.
stuff.
Good talking to you, Jamie.
You too, indeed.
Take care. See you soon.
You too. See you later.
Bye bye.